Hello and welcome to the July 27th weekly JupyterLab call. Today we have 21 people on the call. If you just joined us, please find the agenda in the chat. And if you feel like it, add your name to the attendees list. If you have something to discuss that's only in the 5-minute range, put it in the agenda as a bullet point. If you have something that requires more discussion, wow, put it in the extensive additional discussion section we have this week. Cool. And with that, let's get started. The first person on the agenda today is Rick.
Hey, good morning to those of you somewhere west of the East Coast of the United States, like myself. Good evening, good afternoon, good night for everyone else. Here, just doing one of our security subproject world tours. Some of you may have seen the blog post that we got together with the steering council and talked amongst ourselves, and we thought that for official Jupyter security subprojects, it's important that all people that have some type of commit, owner, admin access to a GitHub repo should have 2FA enabled on their GitHub accounts. Most of you are familiar with why this is a good idea, but it's not completely straightforward. In particular, there's a couple of a little bit of challenges of getting the word out, particularly to users. And so, like, how do we communicate with them without telling the world, hey, here's a bunch of people that don't have 2FA on their account. Maybe you'd like to try random passwords on their GitHub account. So this is kind of our way of coming and saying, we're here to help and exchange some ideas, in particular in that challenge of, how much should we say in a public forum? JupyterLab has a ton of contributors, and that is fantastic. That also means that JupyterLab, your GitHub org, has a substantial number of folks, either team members or contributors to repositories that need to enable 2FA. And it can, Frederick, you've already asked the right question on the issue I dropped, which is, how do we reach out to them? So I'm just going to throw out a couple of ideas, and then if anyone has some suggestions for JupyterLab in particular, I'd love to hear them. One, I know that a lot of the contributors are probably just interns from past projects. And what I'd suggest is, if you are the admin or owner of a repo, and there was an intern on there a while ago, and you can still reach out to them, like their email address, I would say take action. Just remove their access, send them a note via whatever forum, email, Slack you already have, proactively, and be like, hey, we're doing this. If you want to come back and contribute, that'd be wonderful, and we would encourage you. But basically do a little bit of cleanup. If some of you are admins or owners and you don't have 2FA enabled, please do that soon. Your accounts are the most critical. And then once we get through that phase, so we have in a private repository a list of the team members, the GitHub usernames for folks from each org that don't have it enabled. GitHub does not make it easy to find their email addresses, but usually with looking at commits or their public profiles or something like that, we can find emails. There is no private message mechanism in GitHub, so we could do that. Yes, Vidar.
So I know for a lot of the published things, there's a possibility to say that everybody who has published rights for this project needs to have 2FA enabled. Is there? I assume there's no such thing for GitHub.
Or for GitHub, use it? Yes, for GitHub at the GitHub org level, you can enable a requirement that anyone who has read an explicit permission, you're an admin, you're an owner, you have read access to a private repo or write access to a repo, you can enable that at the GitHub organization level. So that's what we're looking to do, is get all the user accounts so they're in line, so that one of the owners can go click, and then it's done and we forget about it. Okay. Yeah, so maybe I should have prefaced that. That's the goal for each of the orgs, for each GitHub org that hosts an official Jupyter subproject, we're looking to get to the point where an owner can go click, and then it's a done deal and we get some peace of mind. Some of you may have gotten a notice from PyPy. PyPy is actually requiring this for critical packages, which is kind of the next step for us anyways, is to think about how do we publish our packages. But okay, so the last thing I was getting to with email addresses is because the security subproject does have lists of folks that we can regenerate. If you get through that first pass of doing the high level accounts and then the easy, like, hey, really appreciate your contribution 4 years ago. I hope you're happy in your new job. Come back and we'll let you in if you enable 2FA. In the middle, we're willing to take on some of the work in like finding email addresses and passing them on to you privately to reach out or helping with an email notification. So basically, we knew that would be some workload, and I'm volunteering at least myself, maybe Jason, because he's on the call, in helping with stuff like that. So let me know for JupyterLab what might work and whether or not we should start on that process of trying to build email addresses, or if you want to take your first passes and see how much work is left afterwards.
Is there anyone on the call who'd like to start working on this?
Well, while people think about that, I'll respond to Michael's question. Michael, you're right, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your first name, but you are correct. Yes, if you click it, you will kick people out. We don't want to do that. And that's why if you look at the blog post, which I'll drop in the chat in a minute, we're trying to give a 30-day window or a 90-day window for the process. Basically, it's now the end of September that we're aiming for. We want time to notify people and get the word out and give them a chance and have the communities, the sub-projects own the process, so that when you do turn that on, like people have had it been communicated to and they don't feel like they've been removed from the community inappropriately. So Mike, I hope that answers your question.
Rick, one thing that is worth maybe talking about with maybe on the server call, or if you happen to be on another call with Steve Sylvester, is Jupyter Releaser. So the way Jupyter Releaser works is you generate tokens to do publishing, but the nature of publishing with tokens for NPM and PyPI is they aren't 2FA. And that's probably okay, because if your account has 2FA and you generated a token, the token is the thing that's at risk. But if your GitHub account is also behind 2FA, then presumably you can't access that. And you can't read a secret after you've written it anyway. So the worst thing you could do is somehow publish, but you'd have to have, like, it's convoluted. So it seems like it probably doesn't really mess with the security profile you want to build, but it's something to know.
Well, thank you for that, actually, because one of the reasons I ended up looking at stuff like this is a history dealing with like identity and access management, and that thing where you go from the user logged in with 2FA, but then they want a token to do something, and just look at the AWS CLI, for example, or even GitHub with their token mechanisms. It's challenging, but doable. So I'm really glad that there is a single point I can now go look at. And I think somebody has an issue associated with that, and you just given me more context to understand it. So yeah, that'd be a great place for us to say, hey, let's make sure our package updates to Conda, NPM, whatever, it follows a similar level of reliability so that people can trust what we do. So thank you. So I'll wait for updates on the issue along with the rest of the team, and just let us know, and then we'll figure out a way to pass on an email list, or the last, sorry, let me finish the thought, Isabella, and then I'll stop chat. I'm running my mouth. The last idea I had was open a private repo and at people in the private repo, but that's also messy, because then you're like, I got to add 20 collaborators at them and then shut down and delete the repo. So, okay, thanks, Isabella. What's next?
I feel like I missed something. There was a point when you were asking, is anyone volunteering to help with that? You and Darian. What was the action specifically?
How to reach out to your community
Okay.
Those in your community without 2FA and let them know about this and give them a chance to enable it is how I would summarize it.
Okay.
Fred, you have your hand up?
Yeah, it's just to mention that at the organization level, if you filter the list of members, there is 74 or 73 people that don't have 2FA. So that means we need to get in touch to 73 people.
There were 78 a few weeks ago. So you've made improvements.
Thanks,
and
Rick.
just to give you the last thing, taking up time on this, we looked at this and it is easier on the sub-projects and orgs with fewer members. If orgs like JupyterLab tackle theirs first, it basically clears out the need for other orgs to even address this. So we're front loading some of the activity.
Cool. Thank you. This is super important. You weren't using up time in an unwise way. Thank you so much.
Is this for SOC 2 compliance, or what's kind of the main driver behind it?
More along the lines of best practices and maintaining trust in the community. This is not based on any specific thing, but if you look at like the actions of PyPy or some of the blog posts that GitHub puts out, we lose trust in our community may lose trust in us if they can't rely on the code. And I'll drop a link to a recent blog post by a law firm that within the United States and Europe both are concerned about open source software as infrastructure, and how we build, package, and deploy it is as important as the actual code itself.
Okay. Next person on the agenda is Fred.
It was just for you to be the first. So I started to refactor the extension manager prior to V3. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So the main idea here is to use PyPy. So the refactoring that I've done doesn't look like much things. On the UI side, I only switches to use the new side panel with a caution that we use, for example, in the debugger, because it makes the UI a bit more consistent, and it will help for people helping with accessibility things. And the features are exactly the same, so you can install, uninstall, enable, disable. You get the warning still, and you have the ability to filter things like it was before. The only difference is on the backend. The ID, can I find it quickly? Forget to open the tab, sorry for that. The idea is to get everything in the backend. So for people that are not aware of it, the current version is using NPM, and the requests to NPM are done from the front end. So we are never going through the backend. And that's brought also the need for downloading from the server a list of allowed and disallowed extension. And actually, even from a security point of view, it's better to have everything on the backend. So the new infrastructure moved everything to the backend. So there is a new extension manager, here it is, that people can extend. And so I've created one for PyPy. I've created one that's just read-only without capability for installing things. And for instance, if people wants to, I don't know, create one for Conda or one for Nix or whatever fancy package manager you're using, then you should be able to do it. And they come with, so there is still the allow list and block list available. It's just that everything is directly done from the Python side and no more from the front end side. So yeah, hopefully it's gonna land soon, but not yet ready for review.
Sweet. Thanks for demoing it. This is it's one of those things everyone asks for. So thank you for doing it. Any questions, comments? Yeah, Mike.
You get the list of extensions for the Discover panel.
Yeah, this one is tricky because PyPy doesn't have a very big API that is still open. So for now, what is done is we are the code is filtering by the classifier. Note that we get the JupyterLab extension classifier that's available. So I'm basically requesting the extension that get that classifier.
Cool. Thanks again. Okay. I have 4 things to talk about, but I'll try to make it quick. One is I am working on removing the deprecated APIs and styles from Lumino and releasing a 2.0 so that we can time it with JupyterLab 4 Notebook 7 because it's the least disruptive time. People will already be upgrading the versions in their package JSONs for JupyterLab libraries. They may as well upgrade the versions for Lumino libraries. The APIs for Lumino will remain mostly the same. However, the deprecated bits will be gone. So if you wrote an extension that targets p-doc panel, it will no longer style correctly. You'll have to target lm-doc panel, which has been the case for 3 years, but maybe you missed it because it was backward compatible. The other is that the icon logic has changed. This is functionality that I think Max worked on, and he tried to keep it backward compatible by overloading the dot icon in, for example, widget.title to be either a new style icon renderer or undefined, or a string, which is the icon class, which is what it defaulted to. And that will no longer work. Now it is just one API. And things like drag and drop supported both mouse events and pointer events. Now they're just pointer events, although that means the tests are broken and I'm not confident I know how to fix it yet, but yeah. So please take a look at that if you're interested in this part of the code base, if you have comments, or if you can help, I would very much like it. Okay, that's one thing, and it's a big one. So if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to. If not, I'll move on to the other 3 things. Very well then. Number 2. I wrote an issue in the Team Compass proposing that instead of listing out all of the names of the members of the JupyterLab Council with a yes or a no or abstain next to their name and waiting X number of days for votes to come in, with all of these incoming votes being publicly viewable, that we should just publish the result of the vote, hold the vote in a private GitHub discussion, and once the voting period has elapsed, publish the results. And this is, in essence, I mean, it's a secret ballot, and there's a reason secret ballots exist, but more practically, I'm aware of at least once, I'm sure it's happened other times, where in the Jupyter Steering Council, where we also have the same mechanism for voting, someone felt uncomfortable voting publicly, so chose not to vote. And we also see a similar dynamic where people often don't want to vote no because it's public. And we sometimes see a dynamic where people wait to see what someone else has voted before they vote. Now that one won't 100% go away with my proposal, because my proposal is to have a GitHub discussion. You could hover over the thumbs up and see what the names next to it are. But I mean, imagine we were a council sitting in a chamber somewhere, you'd all see who raised their hand. So that's probably okay. And B, it remains only the members of that voting body who would see it. So that also seems like less of a burden on people than having it public. Vidar.
So, normally it's the other people in the project whose opinion you care most about as well, right? There are different cases where, the opinions of the public or maybe your employer or something like this is something you care about. So that this one definitely fixes that. But, in the case of, let's say, two positively minded pull requests competing against each other, it's there is an argument for transparency, saying that you should stand behind your vote, and there's also an argument for anonymity, being anonymous, so that you can say that, okay, you can vote without fear of reprisals.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the difference between how you look at what a sub-project council is. Our conception of the JupyterLab Council, for example, is that it should be really large. Like there's 22 people on this call right now. Many of them come week after week after week. I would hope, and adding people to the council is a bit slow, right? Because we have to do them one at a time. Then the entire council votes for the next person, et cetera. So really the fastest we could possibly hope to add people is once a week. But really, I think that represents the active community more than it represents something like a Supreme Court where judges write their names down. And there's a reason why democracies have secret ballots. I don't take lightly an actual firsthand report of someone who said, I simply didn't vote because I was afraid of backlash. I think that is so important to resolve, that if the cost of it is you don't get to see who voted yes on an issue that passed 8-5, that's okay. I think that's not
right. So
accountability.
I think what I'm saying is then that if that's the motivating factor, then the backlash you care most about is the backlash of the other people in the community, in which case a closed issue will still have that problem.
Yes, it isn't perfect. It's better. I'd like to make it better. And if it's not good enough, I'll make another proposal, or you will.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yes, let's not get perfect, get in the way of good. I'm just saying that if somebody else had an idea, that would be the right.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this is a good first step, at least. If there's a better one, there's a better one. But it at least adds it makes it so you can vote within the council without having to worry about outside contributors essentially judging you. Like there could be cases where you choose to vote for what you believe the project should be, and it might not necessarily line up with, like, for instance, what your manager thinks your role in that project should be. There are people who put the project first rather than their job first, and that could be problematic on the council. They might just end up not voting or voting against what they actually want because their boss could look over their shoulder and tell them, no, that's not what I wanted you to vote for. So I think at least that extra security is worth it. If somebody pitches a way to make it 100% anonymous, that's even better.
Yeah, I'm not even 100% sure that we ought to strive for that, because someone will be administering it.
That is
every
true.
time. And also because it seems to me like if we all worked at the same company and we had a regular call or a regular meeting or whatever, and we all sat around a table to try to arrive at consensus, occasionally didn't and raised our hands and voted, that would be a fine system, and yet we'd all see whose hands are up. So I don't know, but in any case, if you have comments on this, please comment on the issue. I hope this won't be an issue we vote on. I hope it's an issue we come to consensus with and just start doing. But if it is an issue we vote on, we'll vote on it in the old way, presumably, right? Not the new way. Okay, so why don't I move on to the third thing? So this I brought up last week. There's another Team Compass issue about voting time frame. I liked the suggestion that came out of a conversation with Jason Grout and the people who were on last week's governance call, which was leave the voting period for a week. However, any voting member could just write a comment right there that says, hey, can we extend it another week? And as long as one other person says cool, then we extend it a second week. So it's a really low barrier way to extend it, but the default still remains a week. I don't know how you feel about that, but however you feel about it, you can either bring it up here or you could add your comment to the issue itself. All right, one last thing. This one, I haven't written anything yet, but I was thinking that there's lots of ways to contribute. This came up in the community call yesterday. Having people testing things was a suggestion that Adam made. Oh, he's on a call, cool. And I think there's lots of ways you can contribute that aren't obvious to someone who's just a user of the software and sort of cares and wants to start participating, but doesn't really feel comfortable or want to, I don't know, open PRs or whatever. So I think I'm gonna write an issue about hosting this call, because it doesn't have to be me every week. I've asked other people to host a few times, but really, maybe lots of people want to. So if we had a sign-up sheet, I'd be happy to be the default fallback in case nobody signs up, but maybe other people want to. If this sounds at all reasonable to you, can I get a thumbs up? I'll write an issue. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to make a decision here, but you know, maybe if you've ever thought of hosting it yourself or would like to or whatever. Okay, 2 is enough to write an issue. 3 is enough to write an issue for sure. Cool. That's it for me. Thanks for tolerating a long one. Isabella, you're next.
Isabella, that's me. And I'm also going to actually say thanks once more, Darian. I really appreciate all your updates on this stuff. But yeah, it's super helpful for me. I similarly have some shorter updates. So one JupyterLab accessibility call will be 15 minutes after the scheduled end of this one. Hooray! Everyone is welcome to that. I do not know what is on the agenda today. So if you like surprises and you don't know if you like accessibility, this may also be the call for you. Cool. And then also we had Jupyter community call yesterday. One of our discussions was a little bit on hosting, because I know I've brought up before people being like, oh, we should rotate, similar to what Darian was just saying about this call. Rotating hosts or having different time zones. We had a few different calls at different time zones for the past few months. And I'm not finding like an emerging pattern of different things, but I think having more people involved might make some of that easier. So I'm starting to do an open call similar to the security group's world tour. I'm going to try and do a world tour for that. So if you're interested at all, reach out to me. However, I didn't put a link there. I definitely have the same username on GitHub and Gitter. So that's probably the best way to find me. But yeah, if you're interested, you don't even have to host alone. I'm really open to options here, but I think it'd be good to have some different people used to running community calls, just so we everything doesn't implode if I like have a cold one day. But thank you very much.
Cool, thank you. And thanks for hosting yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that.
And thanks for hosting for like a year and a half.
No, just yesterday.
Just yesterday. Everything else is a wash. Yeah.
That's how it feels some days. It's going. Thank you all for attending. I do enjoy those calls.
Okay, so we have reached the additional discussion section, and there's a lot to talk about here. I'll just wait a few seconds if there's a short agenda item anyone was considering adding that hasn't. If not, we'll launch into the discussion. Okay. Fred, did you write most of this? Do you want to lead it?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So the idea of this discussion was to list the major items that are still missing in core JupyterLab for starting beta releases. The focus I had in mind when writing those bullet points was mainly, okay, what are the features that are changing the API? Because I think that's those that we would like to have as soon as possible for starting beta. But I must admit there are some bullet points that are not part of that or that could probably be tackled when we are in beta cycles. So the first one is probably Lumino v2 because it's gonna update. The major changes expected in core is the upgrade of TypeScript will change the type exported by some packages. And if I remember correctly from previous troubles, it's gonna be mainly due to the widget package that will require some changes in downstream core. Shouldn't be too hard to get it in when Darian has finished the tough work of actually doing the work in Lumino itself. So that's the first bullet point. And then in JupyterLab itself, so there are multiple subjects. On RTC, I think the only big one missing for the API is the removal of the model DB. I think Kevin is almost done with that. I was just checking during the call. Seems that there are still some UI tests failing, but for what I remember, the content is there. So hopefully it should be soon in master. On RTC subject, there are other discussion that probably can happen in the beta phases, like about save and autosave features. Do we need still a save button? There are some questions about what does trust mean in RTC. We can maybe settle also a bit later on that. And the second main subject is CodeMirror 6. I think we can consider that we are good for beta in the sense that the work has been mainly merged. There is a follow-up issue listing things that have been seen that need either to be fixed or features that have been dropped for the first PR. But I think we are on a good track. The only thing missing is it was planned to drop the code editor facade, and I know that nobody is working on that. And so on that subject, that's mainly the only trouble, let's say, for starting beta. Then there is the extension manager I've demonstrated. So the PR is almost ready. Hopefully it's gonna be ready for review by the end of the week. There is the windowing virtual notebook that's still waiting for review. So if somebody could do that, that would be very, very nice because it's breaking some API. There is a new package linked to LSP. So some work has been done for integrating what was in the LSP extension as part of core. That one I don't think is going to be a blocker for beta because the idea, as it's a very recent integration and without direct feature available for the end user, those API are going to be tagged as a alpha or beta, or just to say they are experimental, a bit like we did for the debugger. So probably it's not a showstopper. And then there are some side questions like I don't know about the event bus. I don't know also linked to Jupyter server about the identity features. So because as far as I remember, that's gonna land only in V2. So do we need to wait for Jupyter server V2 to start JupyterLab V4? And there are also stuff related to notebook V7, but I think they don't. There are mostly features related, small features related, so probably won't change the API so much, so we can keep working on those items, even if we have started the beta cycle. So yeah, Lots of information, sorry guys, but that was to try to list the status.
Jupyter Server 2, we definitely need it because I think the identity and the events and some other things are only Jupyter Server 2 features. And so, yeah, I think their model of the next release has always been that this is what goes in JupyterLab 4. Any questions, comments? That was a lot of stuff, but it's all coming to a head pretty quickly. So presumably some of it is fresh on your minds. Any volunteers to review the virtual notebook rendering? Got a real flood of enthusiasm here. Come on. Thanks, Mike. Awesome. Anyone want to remove code editor.iEditor? This is that specifically what you're talking about, Fred, in that issue? In that bullet point, rather?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have this abstraction around a generic code editor. And the original idea was that maybe one day we'll support multiple editors out of the box, and we'll have this abstraction layer that allows you to swap out Monaco for CodeMirror 5 or CodeMirror 6 for CodeMirror 5, etc. And it just turned out that if you really want performance from an editor, and if you really want to take advantage of the things modern editors do, writing this abstraction layer is not a healthy pattern, and we should probably discard it now that we're changing so much with the CodeMirror 6 refactor anyway. So this is not super straightforward, but not the hardest thing to do, and it's primarily deleting things. Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, just to mention, I forget to add the issue related to that one. In that issue, Johan, that did the work of porting to the code to CodeMirror 6, he has made some good arguments saying that some of the interfaces at least should probably be kept because it's probably not a great idea to just expose the full CodeMirror 6 API. So sure, if people are interested, definitely the idea would be to get some kind of meeting to try to decide just before starting deleting all the code what needs to be done.
Sure, yeah. Rick, what were you thinking?
Just a thought that actually it's you can plug in an editor on a standalone web server in an iframe, and what you really need is the ability to read and write the file system from that editor. And so what would be really, really helpful, I think, and go a long way towards solving this, is just making sure that the model factory, studio, editor and editor, if I remember those three classes well, interface is really well documented. Because I know that, speaking for myself, and I probably didn't do, I'm sure that other people have done it far better. I had to spend a fair amount of time going through examples and trying to figure out how to navigate the code base.
Yeah, there's a lot of complexity there. The premise that you could have it be sort of sandboxed in an iframe, though, it works for some use cases, but if you want real integration with, say, drag and drop, or you want integration with a LSP or another completer, or other things that are sitting in the main application, putting things in your iframe sandboxes it in a way that disallows those sorts of richer pieces of functionality added on top of it. So we're kind of stuck needing to commit to a specific implementation of an editor and putting it in the main application instead of putting it in a sequestered iframe.
Well, sure. No, I'm not arguing that the second doesn't preclude the first, right? I mean, you can have your cake and eat it too and support both. For example, there's no particular reason why VS Code is why a standalone instance of VS Code couldn't be integrated, which gives you an awful lot of functionality. And the only interface that you actually need there is this interaction with the file system.
Well, what if you wanted to highlight some text from another tab in JupyterLab and drag it into that VS Code embedded? You wouldn't be able to do that, right?
No, that's true. But that doesn't argue. No, you're perfectly right. And for that reason, having an integrated code editor it offers you a bunch of features that you don't get from that. I'm not saying it's either or, right? Doing the allowing people to run other things in iframes doesn't preclude us from putting in a generic editor and improving it, right? And it may be that it will be a lovely thing if all of those other editors would just go away, but maybe that's not going to happen tomorrow.
Fair. Vidar?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, maybe riffing a bit on what Frederick said as well, that if we had exposed the entire CodeMirror 5 interface, I'm sure the transition to CodeMirror 6 would have been a lot worse because all of the extensions would be using it, right? So that is the argument for keeping a limited interface exposed. While I think it makes perfect sense to let the extensions that need it access the full API and then have to deal with the changes when it comes, having some friction might be good. I'm not sure what the correct solution there is, but it is worth thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I think, the person who has spent the most time working on this has been Johan. And if he arrived at that sort of conclusion as well, not a maximalist, get rid of the abstraction, but not a minimalist, leave all the abstractions that we had from before, don't modify them, but somewhere in between, then that sounds like through somewhat painful experience, he's arrived at that point of view as well. So yeah, I mean, you're not, I facetiously said it's mostly deleting. Fred corrected that. And yeah, I retract that. There will be some deleting. Hopefully the PR that does this will have more red than green, but yeah, totally. Okay, there was a lot of other stuff in this discussion. Is there any other aspect that caught anyone's eye that they wanted to discuss?
I mentioned, but I don't know if it's needed, that so currently we're using Jupyter Observer v2. I don't know if we need to release a v3. Like, I opened my first PR breaking the API for the extension manager, but even that one, it's removing features that will not be needed any longer and not changing the existing one. So I don't know if it's needed or not, but I don't know, maybe people have other ideas that there are stuff to be changed that would require a new major version of Jupyter Observer.
Are we going to require Jupyter Server too? Or is that a thing where we said, like, if you have, I remember the previous discussion where we said we could support both Jupyter Server 1 and 2, but have limited features if you're on Jupyter Server 1. So if we require Jupyter Server 2, does that interact with the decision for JupyterLab server major version at all, or are those orthogonal decisions?
I don't believe they're related to each other. I think they can be independently decided. And I'm not sure whose use case benefits from supporting either Jupyter Server 1 or Jupyter Server 2, because for the most part, if you have Jupyter Server on your machine, it's because you got it as a dependency and not as a thing you installed yourself. So it seems as though we should simply pick the newer version of Jupyter Server that has the endpoints that we want and ship with that, unless there's a compelling reason not to. Can you think of a compelling reason not to?
So if there was any backwards incompatible things in the release, that would be more intrusive, right, to manage the transition. If you just want the new features in JupyterLab 4, that means that some admin somewhere needs to go and, I don't know. Yeah, no.
I mean, it seems like any other dependency, right? If you want to install the newest version of IPython and it happens to ship with like a new version of Jedi, you probably won't even notice. It should just kind of happen when you upgrade IPython, right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the V4 roadmap? This is actually, I think, a really nice encapsulation of some of the things that are open right now. So thanks for writing it, Fred. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. Brace yourselves.